Welcome to Café Tales and to a brand new series. I'm Alie, your host today. We're joining Superintendent Battle Agatha, Christie's most understated detective. I love reading your comments, and it's fascinating to see where in the world our lovely community is tuning in from. Let me know in the comments. Settle in with a cup of Earl Grey, and let's solve this mystery together. Chapter 1. The Last Hand Murder is a Gentleman's Game. Chapter 1. The Last Hand. The smoking room of the Annam Club possessed that particular quality of hushed reverence found only in the most venerable of London institutions. Heavy velvet curtains filtered the March evening light, while the warm glow of gas fixtures cast gentle shadows across leather-bound chairs that had witnessed for decades of political discourse and gentlemanly debate. The air hung thick with the aromatic blend of expensive tobacco and the lingering essence of fine brandy, creating an atmosphere that spoke of tradition, privilege, and the measured certainties of empire. Sir Reginald Blackwood settled into his customary chair with the satisfaction of a man whose daily rituals provided both comfort and purpose. At 58, the Member of Parliament for West Surrey carried himself with the bearing of one accustomed to deference, his silver hair carefully parted and his evening dress immaculate, despite the day's parliamentary session. The chair itself, a magnificent example of Moroccan leatherwork, positioned strategically between the fireplace and the periodical table, had become so associated with Sir Reginald's presence that other members instinctively avoided it, even during his frequent absences. "Dreadful business in the Commons today," remarked Colonel Hartwell, lowering himself into the adjacent chair with the careful movements of a man whose joints had not entirely forgiven 20 years of Indian service. His weathered face bore the permanent squint of one who had spent too many years studying distant horizons under foreign suns. "That Welsh fellow, what's his name? Lloyd George's protege, making the most extraordinary claims about military expenditure." Sir Reginald accepted his evening copy of the Times from Jameson, the head waiter, with a nod of acknowledgement. Jameson, a man of perhaps 60, whose precise movements and impeccable timing had served the club's membership for over 30 years, placed the brandy and soda at precisely the correct distance from Sir Reginald's right hand before retreating with silent efficiency. Lloyd George's people never did understand the realities of governance, Sir Reginald observed, unfolding his newspaper with practiced ease. "They mistake political theatre for actual policy. Though I confess, Hartwell, there are certain irregularities in our own party's handling of military contracts that bear examination." Dr. Petton glanced up from his medical journal, his pale eyes showing the perpetual fatigue of a man who divided his time between society practice and charitable work in the East End. "Irregularities, you say? Nothing too serious, I hope. The public's confidence in our institutions has taken quite enough battering of late." The conversation proceeded in the measured tones characteristic of men whose opinions carried weight beyond these walls. Around them, the evening ritual of the club unfolded with clockwork precision. Elderly members dozed behind newspapers, their reading spectacles sliding down distinguished noses. A steady stream of uniformed waiters moved between the chairs, their footsteps muffled by thick Persian carpets that had graced these floors since Victoria's reign. In the far corner, barely audible above the general murmur of conversation, came the soft click of chess pieces against a wooden board. Mr. Club's acknowledged champion maintained his evening game with quiet concentration. His opponent this evening was young Ashford, the ambitious member for East Kent, whose political enthusiasm had not yet been tempered by experience. Tremane's thin fingers moved with decisive precision, each move considered with the patience of a man who understood that victory belonged to those who could see furthest ahead. Sir Reginald's attention drifted momentarily from his newspaper toward the chess players. There was something almost mesmerizing about Tremane's absolute stillness between moves. The way he seemed to disappear into the furniture, despite his central position in the room. The man possessed an extraordinary ability to become invisible, while remaining in plain sight, a quality that had served him well in his dual role as assistant librarian and unofficial guardian of the club's intellectual traditions. "The budget debates next week should prove illuminating," Sir Reginald continued, turning a page with deliberate care. "I've prepared certain materials regarding historical precedents that may surprise some of our colleagues. Military procurement, in particular, has operated under assumptions that deserve scrutiny." Colonel Hartwell's expression grew thoughtful. "Historical precedents, you say? How far back are we talking?" Blackwood. "Oh, 30 years or so. The South African business left rather more documentary evidence than one might expect. Sir Reginald's tone remained conversational, but something in his manner suggested deeper currents beneath the surface. Amazing what one discovers when one takes the trouble to examine the archives properly. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9, its resonant notes momentarily silencing conversation throughout the room. Sir Reginald reached absently toward his brandy glass, then paused, his attention caught by a particularly interesting passage in the evening's political commentary. His hand hovered for a moment before returning to the newspaper, leaving the glass undisturbed on its silver coaster. Dr. Petton stretched in his chair, setting aside his journal with a slight yawn. I think I shall take my leave shortly. Early surgery tomorrow, and my hands aren't as steady as they once were after a full day's work. Quite right, agreed Colonel Hartwell, though I confess I find these evening discussions increasingly valuable. The perspective one gains away from Westminster's hurly-burly proves most illuminating. Sir Reginald made a sound of agreement, though his attention remained fixed on his reading. The newspaper rustled softly as he turned another page, and for several minutes the three men sat in companionable silence, each absorbed in his own thoughts. Around them, the club's evening rhythm continued undisturbed, the quiet murmur of conversation, the soft footfalls of waiters, the occasional rustle of turning pages. It was Dr. Petton who first noticed something amiss. A sharp intake of breath drew his attention upward from his journal, and he saw Sir Reginald's newspaper falling in a cascade of white sheets, his hands clutching suddenly at his throat. The MP's face had turned an alarming shade of grey, his eyes wide with surprise and growing panic. Good God! Dr. Petton leaped from his chair, his medical training overcoming the shock of the moment. Hartwell rang for help. But even as willing hands reached out and voices called for assistance, it became apparent that help would arrive too late. Sir Reginald Blackwood's final breath escaped in a soft sigh that seemed to carry with it all the weight of unfinished business and unspoken revelations. His untouched brandy glass remained precisely where Jameson had placed it, its contents undisturbed and innocent in the gaslight's gentle glow. The distinctive scent of bitter almonds hung faintly in the air around Sir Reginald's chair, unmistakable to Dr. Petton's trained senses. As members gathered in shocked whispers and the club secretary was summoned from his evening meal, one question began to form in several minds simultaneously. How does a man die of cyanide poisoning when his glass has never touched his lips? Within the hour, Mr. Fortescue, the club secretary, placed a telephone call to Scotland Yard, his voice carefully controlled as he requested the attendance of senior officers for what appeared to be either an impossible suicide or an equally impossible. More Chapter 2. Enter the methodical mind. Superintendent Battle's arrival at the Anam Club shortly before midnight created none of the stir that might have been expected. Where Inspector Leach betrayed his excitement at investigating such prestigious surroundings through quick darting glances and an unconscious straightening of his shoulders, Battle moved with the same unhurried deliberation he might have displayed entering a Whitechapel tenement or a Surrey cottage. His large frame filled the club's entrance hall without dominating it, and his unremarkable overcoat and bowler hat marked him as exactly what he was, a competent civil servant going about his duties. Mr. Fortescue, the club secretary, had remained at his post despite the late hour, his usual composure somewhat strained by the evening's extraordinary events. A thin man in his 60s with the precise movements of one accustomed to managing complex social hierarchies, he guided the two policemen through corridors lined with portraits of distinguished members, whose painted eyes seemed to observe this unprecedented intrusion with dignified disapproval. Most irregular, of course, Fortescue murmured as they walked, his voice carrying the particular inflection of a man uncertain whether he was apologizing for the crime or for the necessity of police involvement. Nothing of this nature has occurred. In the club's history, we've had the occasional medical emergency, naturally, but this appears to be something altogether different. Battle made no immediate response, instead, taking note of the building's layout with the methodical attention of a man who understood that physical environment often held keys to human behavior. The thick carpets that muffled footsteps, the strategic placement of chairs that allowed for both conversation and observation, the careful lighting that created zones of intimacy within larger spaces, all spoke of an institution designed to facilitate the subtle exchanges of power and influence. The smoking room had been preserved exactly as it was at the time of Sir Reginald's death, Dr. Patone, who had remained at the club to assist with the investigation, had insisted that nothing be disturbed until proper authorities arrived. The MP's chair sat empty, its leather surface bearing the faint impression of long occupancy, while the brandy glass remained on its silver coaster like a piece of evidence that stubbornly refused to yield its secrets. Dr. Petton examined the deceased immediately, Fortescue explained, gesturing toward the medical man, who rose from a nearby chair with the weary movements of someone who had witnessed more than his share of human mortality. His professional opinion was quite definitive regarding the cause of death. Dr. Patone approached with the careful bearing of a man conscious that his words would carry significant weight. His pale eyes showed the strain of the evening's events, but his medical training had taught him to compartmentalize shock in favor of factual observation. Cyanide, poisoning, without question, he stated in response to Battle's calm inquiry. The symptoms were unmistakable: the sudden onset, the characteristic coloration, and, of course, the distinctive odor. Death would have occurred within minutes of ingestion. Battle's attention turned to the brandy glass, examining it without touching. Inspector Leach hovered nearby, notebook at the ready, clearly eager to begin the process of evidence collection and witness questioning that marked the conventional beginning of a murder investigation. "The glass appears untouched," Battle observed in his measured tone. "You're certain Sir Reginald hadn't taken any of his drink?" "Absolutely certain," Dr. Petton confirmed. "Jameson placed it at precisely 9:15, and Sir Reginald was reading his newspaper when the symptoms began at approximately 9:40. I observed him reach toward the glass once, but return his attention to his reading without drinking." The contradiction inherent in these facts hung in the air like the lingering aroma of expensive tobacco. Battle's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts as he began a slow circuit of the area around Sir Reginald's chair, his eyes taking in details that might escape more hurried observation: the positioning of the periodical table, the angle of the chair relative to the gas fixtures, the pattern of wear on the carpet that spoke of years of established routine. "Tell me about Sir Reginald's habits," Battle requested, settling into the chair opposite where the dead man had sat. The simple action seemed to shift the room's atmosphere, transforming the scene from one of shocking disruption to a place where patient questions might yield measured answers. Fortescue's relief at being asked about familiar territory was evident. In his more confident tone, Sir Reginald maintained quite regular habits. He arrived each evening between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, took his customary chair, and ordered the same drink, brandy and soda, prepared to his specific preferences. He typically remained until 10:30 or 11, reading and engaging in conversation with other members. His demeanor this evening anything unusual? "Not particularly," Dr. Petton interjected. "He seemed in good spirits, actually discussing political matters with Colonel Hartwell and myself, something about military procurement and historical precedents he'd been researching." Battle's interest sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Historical precedents? Related to the South African War, I believe." He mentioned examining archival materials, documents from 30 years past. Colonel Hartwell seemed quite interested in the subject. The appearance of Jameson at this moment provided Battle with his first opportunity to observe the club's staff dynamics in operation. The head waiter approached with the deferential bearing that came from decades of serving men who wielded considerable influence beyond these walls, yet Battle detected something else in the man's manner, a nervousness that went beyond the natural shock of having death visit his domain. "Jameson served Sir Reginald this evening," Fortescue explained. "He prepared the drink exactly as always, and placed it at the member's right hand, according to established procedure." Battle's conversation with the waiter revealed little beyond confirmation of the evening's routine, yet he found himself studying the man's responses with particular attention. Jameson's hands showed a slight tremor that might have been age, shock, or something more complex. His answers came readily enough, but with the careful precision of someone who had given considerable thought to what he might be asked. "You've served Sir Reginald for many years," Battle observed, his tone conversational rather than interrogative. "Near on 15 years, sir. Always the same order, always the same chair. A gentleman of regular habits was Sir Reginald." As the interview concluded, Battle found his attention drawn to the broader patterns of behavior throughout the room. Other members had gradually drifted away as the evening advanced, but a few remained ostensibly reading or engaged in quiet conversation, yet clearly aware that they were witnessing history. The chess table in the corner had been abandoned. the pieces frozen in mid-game like a tableau of interrupted strategy. Inspector Leach's eagerness to begin formal interviews with all present was evident in his frequent glances toward Battle, awaiting direction. Yet Battle seemed content to absorb the atmosphere, to understand the rhythms and relationships that governed this closed world, before imposing the external demands of criminal investigation. The club's social hierarchy revealed itself in subtle, wise the deference shown to certain members, the positioning of chairs that reflected status and influence, the unspoken protocols that governed interaction between different classes of membership and staff. Battle observed these dynamics with the patience of a man who understood that human nature expressed itself as much through social structure as through individual action. Dr. Petton's mention of Sir Reginald's research interests lingered in Battle's mind as he concluded his initial examination of the scene. Historical precedents from the Boer War suggested investigative work that might have uncovered uncomfortable truths for certain individuals. The combination of a man preparing to expose past irregularities and his sudden death by mysterious means created patterns that Battle's experienced mind recognized as potentially significant. As the clock approached 1 o'clock in the morning, Battle finally indicated his readiness to begin the systematic questioning that would form the foundation of his investigation. The Annam Club, for all its traditions of privacy and discretion, would be required to yield its secrets to the patient scrutiny of the law. Yet Battle approached this necessity with the understanding that the truth, when it emerged, would likely prove as complex as the institution that sheltered it. Chapter 3. Shadows in the smoking room. The following morning brought Battle back to the Annam Club with the methodical persistence that characterized his approach to investigation. The smoking room, now bereft of its evening atmosphere, revealed different aspects of its character in the pale March daylight that filtered through tall windows. What had seemed mysterious and intimate by gaslight appeared merely and wood and brass fittings that spoke of permanence rather than intrigue. Inspector Leach had spent the intervening hours pursuing the conventional avenues of inquiry that formed the backbone of police procedure. Sir Reginald's parliamentary offices had been examined, his correspondence reviewed, his recent activities traced through the methodical accumulation of detail that would eventually provide the framework within which motive and opportunity might be understood. Interesting pattern emerging, Leach reported as they settled in Mr. Forskew's office, away from the curious attention of members who had begun arriving for their morning routine. Sir Reginald had been conducting what amounts to a private investigation into military procurement contracts dating back to the South African War. Quite extensive correspondence with the War Office archives, requests for specific documentation, interviews with retired officers. Battle's attention focused with the quiet intensity that his colleagues had learned to recognize as significant. What nature of irregularities was he pursuing? Supply contracts primarily, equipment that failed to meet specifications, medical supplies that proved inadequate, transport arrangements that resulted in unnecessary casualties. Leach consulted his notes with the precision of a man who understood the importance of accurate detail. He'd scheduled a private meeting with the Chancellor next week to discuss his findings. The implications of such research were not lost on Battle, whose experience had taught him that the exposure of past corruption often provided powerful motives for present-day violence. Men who had profited from wartime suffering would have compelling reasons to prevent their activities from becoming public knowledge, particularly if they remained in positions of influence or respectability. Any indication of specific individuals he meant to expose. Nothing definitive in his papers, but his research was quite focused. He'd requested personnel files for several officers who served in procurement roles, civilian contractors who held supply agreements, medical personnel involved in equipment specifications. Battle's interview with Colonel Hartwell that morning revealed layers of complexity beneath the straightforward military bearing the man presented to the world. Seated in the club's library, surrounded by volumes that chronicled the Empire's military adventures, Hartwell proved more forthcoming about his relationship with Sir Reginald than his initial shock had allowed. "We'd known each other for 30 years, Hartwell explained, his weathered hands clasped before him with military precision. Served together briefly in South Africa, though in different capacities. Reginald was attached to procurement oversight, while I commanded a supply column. Difficult times, those many decisions had to be made quickly, not always with perfect information. The colonel's tone suggested personal experience with the moral complexities of wartime decision-making. Battle noted the slight tension that entered the man's voice when discussing the period Sir Reginald had been investigating. His recent research, did he discuss his findings with you? To some extent. Reginald felt that certain irregularities had been overlooked in the rush to conclude the war. Men had died, he believed, due to inadequate equipment and supplies. He felt a moral obligation to set the record straight, regardless of the embarrassment. Two individuals who might have profited inappropriately. Battle observed that Colonel Hartwell's military conscience appeared genuinely troubled by the possibility of past corruption. Yet there was something in his manner that suggested personal involvement beyond mere professional interest. The careful way he chose his words indicated a man walking through dangerous territory, concerned about which confidences might prove damaging. Dr. Petton's circumstances proved equally complex upon closer examination. Battle's discreet inquiries revealed gambling debts that, while not enormous by the standards of the club's membership, represented serious financial pressure for a medical man dependent upon his practice. The doctor's presence at the club each evening served purposes beyond social convenience. It provided respite from creditors and the appearance of prosperity that his actual circumstances no longer supported. Sir Reginald had offered assistance, Dr. Petton admitted when pressed gently about his financial situation. Nothing improper, you understand, a private loan between gentlemen, arranged through proper solicitors. I had intended to accept his offer, actually. His death has left me in rather more desperate circumstances than before. The timing of this potential financial rescue coming so close to Sir Reginald's death created patterns that Battle filed away for future consideration. Men had killed for far less than the amount of Dr. Petton's debts, and the doctor's medical knowledge provided technical capability for the specific method employed. Young Mr. Ashford's interview revealed different but equally compelling sources of resentment. The member for East Kent possessed the particular combination of ambition and frustration common to junior politicians, who believed their talents deserved swifter recognition. His relationship with Sir Reginald had soured over what appeared to be personal rather than political matters. Sir Reginald felt I was unsuitable for his daughter, Ashford stated with barely concealed bitterness. My prospects, he claimed, were insufficient to support a woman accustomed to certain standards. The engagement was terminated at his insistence, despite Margaret's feelings in the matter. Battle noted the young man's use of the daughter's Christian name, suggesting an intimacy that Sir Reginald had found threatening. Political protégés who became romantically involved with their mentors. Families often found themselves in positions of considerable vulnerability. His recent research activities, were you aware of their nature? Vaguely. He'd mentioned uncovering historical irregularities, but I assumed it was merely another of his crusades for governmental reform. Sir Reginald enjoyed exposing inefficiency and corruption, particularly when it involved military matters. As the day progressed, Battle found his attention increasingly drawn to the club's operational rhythms and the staff who maintained them. The seamless service that members took for granted required intimate knowledge of individual preferences and habits, knowledge that could prove dangerous in the wrong hands. Mr. Tremaine, the assistant librarian and chess champion, emerged as a figure of particular interest through the gradual accumulation of small observations. Unlike the other staff members who displayed the deferential invisibility expected of their positions, Taman possessed an intellectual bearing that suggested capabilities far beyond his current employment. His chess reputation drew respect even from members accustomed to commanding others, yet he remained essentially invisible within the club's social hierarchy. Battle observed Taman during the afternoon hours, noting the man's precise movements and the way his presence seemed to register subconsciously with members who nonetheless rarely acknowledged him directly. The assistant librarian's military bearing evident in his posture and the economical efficiency of his gestures suggested a background that might have encompassed more than civilian employment. 22 years he's been with us, Mr. Fortescue confirmed when questioned about staff tenure. Came to us with excellent references, though somewhat overqualified for the position. A man of considerable intellectual attainments, but circumstances had reduced his options somewhat. The nature of those limiting circumstances remained unspecified, yet Battle sensed layers of personal history that warranted deeper investigation. Taman's habit of remaining in the club well past normal duty hours ostensibly to pursue his chess games and maintain the library's collections. provided him with opportunities for observation that other staff members lacked. As evening approached, and the club's membership began arriving for their customary routines, Battle positioned himself to observe the subtle dynamics of interaction between different elements of the institution's community. The crime he was investigating had required not only technical knowledge and access, but also intimate familiarity with patterns of behavior that took years to establish and understand. The realization that such knowledge pointed inevitably toward someone within the club's inner circle, whether member or staff, brought with it the uncomfortable recognition that the investigation would necessarily violate the very discretion and privacy that made institutions like the A&M possible. Yet murder, as Battle had learned through long experience, possessed its own logic that transcended social conventions and institutional loyalty. The gathering shadows of evening transformed the club once again into the intimate setting where Sir Reginald had met his end, and Battle settled into patient observation of the human currents that moved through rooms where secrets and ambitions intersected with deadly consequence. Chapter 4. The patient Hunter Battle's investigation had entered the phase he privately termed the watching period, those crucial hours when patient observation often revealed more than the most intensive questioning. He had positioned himself in various corners of the A&M Club throughout the third day, a large, unremarkable presence that members and staff alike had begun to accept as part of the temporary disruption to their ordered world. Bought from his vantage point in the morning room, Battle observed the intricate ballet of institutional routine. Members arrived with the punctuality of men whose time was measured in parliamentary divisions and board meetings, while staff moved through their duties with the unconscious precision that came from years of unvarying service. Yet within these established patterns, Battle detected the subtle variations that spoke of individual psychology and personal history. Inspector Leach approached with the measured excitement of a man who had discovered something significant during his methodical examination of Sir Reginald's papers. The younger officer's notebook bristled with markers and annotations of the thorough documentation that would prove essential when the case reached its conclusion. Found something interesting in the War Office correspondence, Leach reported, settling into the chair opposite Battle with the careful movements of a man conscious that their conversation might be observed. Sir Reginald had requested specific files relating to court-martial proceedings from 1902 cases involving alleged cowardice and subsequent exonerations. Battle's attention sharpened with the focus of a hunter detecting fresh spur. Court proceedings suggested individual cases rather than general corruption, personal tragedies rather than systemic failure. Any particular names mentioned? Several, but one file was marked as especially significant as Sergeant William Tamon, accused of abandoning his post during a supply convoy attack. The charges were later proven false when witnesses came forward, but not before the man's military career had been destroyed. The revelation settled into Battle's consciousness with the weight of inevitability. The connection between Sir Reginald's research and the club's assistant librarian was no longer a matter of speculation but of documented fact. Yet Battle's expression remained unchanged, his years of experience having taught him that premature conclusions often obscured more complex truths. The accusing officer, Lieutenant Reginald Blackwood, as he was then, the file indicates he filed a report claiming Tamon had fled during the engagement, leaving critical supplies undefended. 3 men died as a result of equipment that was subsequently lost or damaged. Battle absorbed this information with the methodical care he brought to all evidence, yet his mind was already beginning to construct a psychological framework that would explain not only motive but method. A man falsely accused of cowardice, his career destroyed by an ambitious young officer's need to find scapegoats for military failures. Such injustices could fester for decades, growing more poisonous with time. The exoneration brought that about witnesses who had been separated from their unit during the engagement came forward 6 months later. They testified that Tamon had remained at his post throughout the attack, defending the supplies despite being severely outnumbered. The accusations were formally withdrawn, but by then Tamon had been cashiered and his record permanently tainted. The bureaucratic language of military justice could not disguise the human tragedy underlying these dry facts. Battle understood that for a professional soldier, the loss of honor and career represented a form of death that might prove harder to bear than physical wounds. Such men often carried their grievances like chronic pain, a constant reminder of injustice that time had failed to heal. Throughout the afternoon, Battle observed Mr. T-Main with new understanding. The assistant librarian's movements possessed the economy of purpose that marked veteran soldiers, while his chess-playing revealed the strategic patience of a man accustomed to long-term planning. More significantly, Battle noted how position allowed him to observe and absorb the personal habits of every member, while remaining essentially invisible himself. The chess corner had become Battle's preferred observation point, ostensibly because it commanded views of both the smoking room and the main corridor, but actually because it allowed him to study T-Main's interactions with members who sought intellectual challenge. The assistant librarian's reputation as an unbeatable opponent drew a steady stream of challenges, each providing opportunities for conversation that revealed far more than mere chess ability. "Remarkable player, our Mr. T-Main," commented Colonel Hartwell during one such observation session, settling into a nearby chair with his customary pipe. "Never seen him lose a game, though he's gracious enough about it to keep the defeats from becoming humiliating." Battle's response was carefully neutral. "He's been here many years, I understand, 22 or thereabouts. Came to us highly recommended, though I always suspected he was overqualified for the position. Something about the man suggests broader experience than library work typically requires." The colonel's tone carried the unconscious recognition that one military man often showed for another, even across class boundaries. Battle noted how Hartwell's manner toward T-Main differed from his interactions with other staff, less condescending, more genuinely respectful. "Military background, perhaps. Wouldn't surprise me. He has the bearing, certainly. Never mentioned it directly, but then discretion is one of his most valuable qualities. Members tell him things during chess games that they might not share elsewhere." This casual observation struck Battle as particularly significant. The combination of intellectual respect and functional invisibility made T-Main an ideal repository for the club's secrets. Over 22 years of evening games, how many confidences had been shared across the chessboard? How many personal details had been absorbed by a man whose own history remained largely unknown? Battle's investigation of T-Main's background required careful maneuvering through official channels that were often reluctant to discuss military records, particularly those involving disciplinary actions later proven unjustified. Yet persistence yielded results, and by evening, Battle had assembled a comprehensive picture of William T-Main's military service and subsequent civilian life. The records painted the portrait of an exemplary soldier whose career had been destroyed by a single false accusation. T-Main had enlisted as a young man from a respectable working-class family, risen through the ranks on merit, and earned commendations for both courage and tactical ability. His specialization in supply logistics had made him valuable to commanders, who understood that armies moved on their stomachs and fought with the equipment their supply lines could provide. The destruction of T-Main's career had been swift and thorough. Despite the eventual exoneration, no mechanism existed for restoring lost years or damaged reputation. Civilian employment had proved difficult for a man whose skills were military rather than commercial, whose references were tainted by the shadow of official disgrace, however unjustified. The Anam Club had provided T-Main with something approaching sanctuary, respectable employment that utilized his intellectual abilities while offering the regular social interaction that his chess skills made possible. Yet Battle recognized that such apparent contentment might mask deeper currents of resentment and carefully nursed grievance. As evening approached and the club's membership began arriving for their customary routines, Battle positioned himself to observe the recreation of the circumstances that had prevailed during Sir Reginald's final night. The smoking room filled with its usual complement of distinguished figures, each settling into established patterns that had governed their lives for years or decades. T-Main appeared at his customary time, setting up the chessboard with movements that suggested ritual as much as practical necessity. Battle noted how the assistant librarian's presence seemed to activate some invisible network of awareness who might not acknowledge him directly, nonetheless oriented themselves around his location, as if his intellectual availability provided a form of gravitational pull. The psychological profile that emerged from Battle's observations was complex and troubling. T-Main possessed the patience of a career soldier, the intellectual sophistication of a strategic thinker, and the accumulated grievances of a man who had suffered profound injustice. His position at the club provided not only the technical knowledge necessary to commit an undetectable murder, but also the psychological satisfaction of turning his enforced servitude into an instrument of delayed revenge. Yet Battle understood that psychological insight alone would prove insufficient for legal purposes. The challenge that lay ahead involved transforming understanding into evidence, suspicion into proof, and moral certainty into judicial conviction. The game between detective and suspect was entering its critical phase where patience and strategic thinking would determine the final outcome. Chapter 5, Endgame. The fourth evening of Battle's investigation found him seated across the chessboard from Mr. T-Main, the pieces arranged in their opening positions like soldiers, preparing for a conflict whose outcome remained uncertain. The assistant librarian had accepted Battle's request for a game with the same quiet courtesy he showed all members, his thin fingers moving the white pieces with practiced precision while his pale eyes revealed nothing of his thoughts. "I confess, I'm not much of a player," Battle remarked, advancing his king's pawn with the deliberate movement of a man who understood that admitting weakness often proved strategically valuable. "But I've always found chess instructive. The way patterns develop, the importance of seeing several moves ahead." T-Main responded with his own pawn advance, his expression maintaining the neutral attentiveness that had served him well through 22 years of club service. "Chess rewards patience above all other qualities," he observed in his quiet voice. "Hasty moves, however brilliant they appear, often prove fatal to one's position." The smoking room around them had settled into its evening rhythm, members absorbed in newspapers and conversation while the gas fixtures cast their familiar warm glow across leather and polished wood. Yet Battle sensed an undercurrent of tension that had not existed before his investigation began, the subtle awareness that accompanied the presence of unresolved danger. "Military experience, I suspect, provides excellent preparation for chess," Battle continued, developing his knight with careful consideration. "The ability to think strategically, to anticipate your opponent's intentions several moves in advance." A slight pause in T-Main's movements was the only indication that the comment had registered as significant. "I wouldn't know about that," he replied, bringing out his own knight in response. "My experience has been limited to civilian pursuits." Battle studied the board with apparent concentration while actually observing his opponent's manner. T-Main's denial carried the weight of long practice, yet something in his tone suggested a man who had grown weary of maintaining necessary deceptions. "Curious thing about Sir Reginald's research," Battle remarked, castling his king to safety with movements that seemed almost absent-minded. "Court-martial records from the South African War. Fascinating reading. Those old file stories of courage and cowardice, of men whose reputations were made or destroyed by single moments under fire." T-Main's response to this gambit came in the form of an aggressive advance in the center of the board, his pieces beginning to coordinate in patterns that spoke of superior strategic understanding. "Sir Reginald was always interested in military history," he said. Many members shared that fascination with past campaigns. Indeed, though his interests seemed quite specific, cases where initial accusations proved unfounded, where justice arrived too late to repair damaged careers. Battle captured a pawn with methodical precision, opening lines for his pieces while maintaining his conversational tone. Sergeant William Taine, for instance, falsely accused of cowardice by Lieutenant Reginald Blackwood, exonerated 6 months later, but by then the damage was irreversible. The chessboard between them had become a battlefield where two different forms of warfare intersected. T-Main's superior skill was evident in the growing pressure his pieces exerted across the center. Yet Battle's patient defensive arrangements suggested the stubborn resistance of a man who understood that victory sometimes belonged to those who could endure longest. "A tragic case," T-Main acknowledged, his voice carrying no more emotion than if he were discussing weather. "Military justice, like all human institutions, sometimes fails those it purports to serve." Battle moved his queen into a position that appeared vulnerable, yet actually strengthened his overall coordination. The effects of such injustice can linger for decades. A man's entire life altered by false accusations, his honor destroyed, his career ruined. Such wounds might never fully heal. "Check," T-Main announced quietly, his bishop sliding across the board with lethal precision. Battle examined the position with the same methodical care he brought to all problems, eventually moving his king to safety while opening new possibilities. For Café, Temporary setbacks often reveal unexpected opportunities, he observed. Your position looks commanding, but chess has taught me that apparent advantage can prove illusory. The assistant librarian's response came through a series of moves that demonstrated his tactical superiority. Yet Battle noted that Temain's pieces, despite their threatening positions, had become somewhat overextended. The psychological pressure of their conversation was beginning to affect even this master player's judgment. Sir Reginald's habit of touching his lips after handling his newspaper, Battle continued, advancing a pawn that seemed insignificant, yet opened a crucial diagonal for his bishop. Fascinating how people develop such unconscious patterns. 22 years of observation would make one quite familiar with such personal quirks. Temain's hand paused over his rook, the first visible sign that Battle's words were penetrating. His carefully maintained composure. Members' habits become quite predictable after long acquaintance, he said carefully. Predictable enough that one might plan around them, Battle agreed. The leather of his chair, for instance, treated with a cyanide solution that would transfer to his fingers when he gripped the armrests, then to his lips through his habitual gesture, a method requiring intimate knowledge of both chemistry and behavior. The chess game had reached a critical juncture where both kings faced threats that demanded precise calculation. Temain studied the position with intense concentration, yet Battle sensed that the assistant librarian's focus had shifted beyond the immediate tactical requirements to broader strategic considerations. Your move, Battle prompted gently, his tone carrying none of the triumphant satisfaction that might have been expected from a man closing in on his quarry. Temain's response surprised both players, a quiet move that seemed to concede the initiative, while actually setting up possibilities for counterplay that would emerge only after several more exchanges. Sometimes, he said, the most effective moves are those that appear to be retreats. Indeed, though in chess, as in life, there comes a moment when further maneuvering becomes impossible, when the position demands honest confrontation rather than continued subtlety. Battle's own move carried multiple threats that Temain could not simultaneously address. The assistant librarian's superior skill had brought him to a commanding position, yet the accumulating pressure of Battle's patient defense was beginning to tell. Check, Battle announced, his queen finally entering the attack with decisive force. Temain studied the board for several minutes before moving his king to what appeared to be safety. Yet Battle's next move revealed the trap that had been developing throughout their game, a quiet advance that left Temain's position untenable despite his material advantage. Remarkable, Temain observed, his voice carrying genuine admiration for the tactical sequence that had overturned his apparent superiority. I confess I failed to see that combination developing. Battle's response was equally quiet. Sometimes, the most patient plans prove most effective, though I suspect you understand that principle better than most, given your own long-term thinking. The admission, when it came, emerged as naturally as any other move in their extended game. Temain's acknowledgement of his guilt carried no dramatic weight, no theatrical confession, but rather the quiet dignity of a man who had finally reached the endgame he had been playing for over 2 decades. Sir Reginald never knew, Temain said, his eyes still fixed on the chessboard between them. Never recognized me. Never understood that the man serving his brandy each evening was the sergeant whose life he'd destroyed with false accusations. 22 years of watching him prosper while I remained invisible, of listening to his political speeches about justice and military honor. Battle made no immediate response, understanding that some confessions required time to unfold completely. Around them, the club's evening routine continued undisturbed, members absorbed in their own concerns, while history quietly resolved itself in the corner, where 2 men sat over an abandoned game. The technical details emerged gradually: careful preparation of the cyanide solution, the treatment of Sir Reginald's chair during the previous evening when the smoking room was empty, the precise timing required to ensure the poison would be absorbed through skin contact rather than accidental ingestion. Temain's knowledge of chemistry acquired through military training in field medicine had provided the expertise necessary for such sophisticated murder. Yet beneath the technical accomplishment lay the deeper satisfaction of poetic justice, finally achieved. Sir Reginald's death during his investigation of military corruption represented, in Temain's carefully ordered mind, the completion of a moral equation that had remained unbalanced for 30 years. Battle's response to these revelations reflected the professional compassion that had characterized his entire career. He understood the grievance that had driven T-Main to murder, while maintaining his obligation to ensure that justice, however delayed, would finally be served. Epilogue. After the last move, the arrest of Mr. William T-Main proceeded with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his 22 years of service at the Annam Club. No dramatic scenes disturbed the institution's evening routine. No raised voices echoed through corridors where discretion had always been valued above sensation. T-Main accompanied Inspector Leach from the premises with the bearing of a man who had finally completed a task that had defined his adult life, his confession having been recorded with the same meticulous care he had once brought to organizing the club's library collections. Battle remained in the smoking room for some time after the arrest, studying the chessboard where their game sat, frozen in its final position. The pieces told their own story of strategy and patience, of long-term planning overcome by methodical investigation. Tomorrow, someone would reset the board for new games, new challenges, but tonight it stood as a monument to the complex mathematics of human justice. Mr. Fortescue approached with the measured step of a man conscious that his institution faced unprecedented challenges to its reputation. The club secretary's primary concern, naturally, involved maintaining the discretion that members expected, even under such extraordinary circumstances. The arrangements with the press, Fortescue began carefully. I trust they can be managed with appropriate sensitivity to the club's position. Battle's response carried the reassurance of a professional who understood that institutions, like individuals, possessed reputations worth preserving. Mr. T-Main's arrest will be reported as a matter of public record, but the specific details of the crime need not involve extensive discussion of club procedures or member activities. A week later, Battle found himself sharing a quiet pint with Inspector Leach in a public house far removed from the rarefied atmosphere of Pall Mall. The younger officer's enthusiasm for the case's successful resolution was tempered by obvious puzzlement about the methods that had achieved it. Still, don't entirely understand how you focused on T-Main so quickly, Leach admitted, wiping foam from his upper lip with the unself-conscious manner of a man relaxing after intensive professional effort. His connection to Sir Reginald seemed so remote, so historical. Battle's explanation reflected his long experience with the patterns of human behavior that transcended immediate circumstances. The crime required three elements that rarely coincide by accident: technical knowledge, intimate access, and powerful motive. T-Main possessed all three, plus the patience to wait 3 decades for the perfect opportunity. But how did you know to look for that particular historical connection? I didn't initially, but Sir Reginald's research into military courts-martial suggested personal, rather than general interest. When combined with T-Main's obvious military background and his position of invisible authority within the club, the possibilities narrowed considerably. Leach's nod suggested understanding, though Battle suspected the younger man would require years of experience before truly comprehending how psychological insight could substitute for conventional evidence. The art of reading human nature like chess mastery demanded patience and practice that could not be abbreviated through enthusiasm alone. The Annam Club's recovery from its brush with violence proceeded with the institutional resilience that had sustained it through wars, political upheavals, and social transformations. Within a month, the smoking room had returned to its customary rhythms, though Sir Reginald's chair remained unoccupied by unspoken agreement among the membership. Dr. Pettin's financial difficulties resolved themselves through an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative, allowing him to maintain both his club membership and his charitable work in the East End. His gambling had ceased entirely, the shock of near ruin having provided the motivation that previous warnings had failed to supply. Colonel Hartwell assumed responsibility for continuing Sir Reginald's investigation into military procurement irregularities, approaching the task with the thoroughness that his friend's death had made both personal obligation and professional duty. The eventual parliamentary report would result in significant reforms to military contracting procedures, though such improvements could never compensate for past injustices. Young Mr. Ashford's political education accelerated rapidly following his exposure to the serious consequences of personal grievances left unresolved. His relationship with Sir Reginald's daughter resumed, gradually built now on mutual understanding rather than mere romantic attraction, with the blessing of a family that had learned to value character over conventional prospects. The chess corner acquired a new regular player when Mr. Forskew somewhat surprisingly revealed a talent for the game that had long remained hidden beneath his administrative duties. His appointment as the club's unofficial chess coordinator ensured that intellectual challenge would continue to flourish, though without the particular intensity that Tremaine's presence had provided. Battle's final report on the case emphasized the systematic nature of the bit investigation, while omitting the more speculative aspects of psychological analysis that had guided his thinking. Official documents, he had learned, served justice best when they focused on demonstrable facts rather than interpretive insights, however accurate those insights might prove. The fundamental questions raised by Tremaine's crime about justice, delayed, grievances nursed across decades, and the corrosive effects of institutional failure remained largely unexamined in official proceedings. Yet Battle understood that such broader considerations lay beyond the scope of criminal investigation, belonging instead to the realm of social philosophy and moral reflection. As he filed his final papers and prepared to move on to new cases, Battle reflected on the particular satisfaction this investigation had provided. The successful resolution had emerged not from dramatic inspiration or fortunate accident, but from the patient application of professional skill and human understanding. In a world increasingly fascinated by sensational methods and theatrical revelations, there remained something deeply gratifying about achieving justice through methodical work and careful observation. The Annam Club would endure as it had for generations, providing sanctuary for men whose public responsibilities required private spaces for reflection and renewal. Tremaine's crime had violated that sanctuary, but the institution's recovery demonstrated the resilience that came from serving purposes larger than individual ambition or grievance. Battle walked away from the case with the quiet contentment of a craftsman who had completed difficult work according to professional standards, leaving behind a small corner of the world where justice had been served and truth finally revealed. Thanks for joining us for Murder is a Gentleman's Game. If you enjoyed Superintendent Battle's patient investigation into chess, cyanide, and military injustice, don't forget to subscribe for more mysteries from this new series. Until next time, this is Alie signing off from Café Tales.